A little bit of a new format for this week, but I promise we'll make it through this together. I really do apologize. I'm sure that I'm like falling out of the frame and I look like a fucking idiot standing here in the corner. But this is only going to be for this week. Maybe next week. We'll see how I'm feeling. Like I said last time, I actually just recently had a surgery. It was on my tailbone. So sitting down in that kind of like leaning back posture that I normally do would be very, very painful for an extended period of time, like it would take to make one of these videos. And I think that like sitting awkwardly forward, trying to keep weight off of it, would make me look like I'm wigging out on crack or something while I'm trying to make the video. Not that the visual part of these videos is very important anyway. I imagine that most people are watching from, or not even watching, listening while they're like painting a mini or doing some taxes or something. But I think that standing, as awkward as it looks, is probably the best solution to minimize pain and make me not look as ridiculous, although I'm sure somewhat ridiculous. So, like I was saying in the last video, I really would like to talk about Dungeon Master Johnny's The Last Edition. I actually have been sent a PDF of it. It was required when I was in Dungeon Master Johnny's game that I also spoke about, that I was playing. It was a live streamed game, and I'm going to talk about other aspects of it, playing on a live stream, doing those kinds of like recorded games, things that I liked and didn't like about him DMing and stuff like that. But I want to talk about the rule system. So I don't actually have a printed copy of the last edition. I'm going to refer to Advanced D&D First Edition, or at least I'm going to hold on to it. I do have some notes about the last edition and some of the rules, but there isn't a print version. Important for this video, he is going to release a revised version of the rule system for the last edition very shortly. He's told me about it. There's going to be some wording changes. So if I mention something that's poorly worded, there's a good chance that his revised version will remedy that. But, you know, I'm reviewing what I have right now. I'm giving him some time to release that, and it hasn't really materialized. Maybe he just hasn't sent it to me. I don't know. But I do want to talk about it. It's also the version that you can see me playing, which I think is very important. So if I give a sort of criticism that actually happens during the game, I think that that's really valuable feedback as opposed to just something purely abstract. So I'm going to say a lot of things that are very negative. I'm sure that Johnny's going to watch this video. I don't hate your game. I don't hate you. I'm going to say more positive things than negative. But I'm a very critical person, and I'm only saying this to help your future versions be better. Some of these are preferential as well. But I like to be the voice of adversity. I think that much is very clear from my channel. So the first thing that I saw when I started reading, I believe that his book starts with a quote from Gary Gygax about how the Dungeon Master has the all-powerful authority all the time. Very fitting for DM Johnny's style of play. But when we get into character creation, my first issue is that it requests for 4d6s to be rolled. 4 6-sided dice for your character's stats. And I'm not sure why that is, because older versions of D&D generally are a 3d6 kind of game, lower stats, and that actually is relevant to a stat line or the ability score line that's used in the game as well. But 46 for stats in the last edition, at least the first revision of it. I am not sure why you would make this supposedly old school game and then go with 4d6. I think that that's kind of going to give people overinflated stats a little bit. I think 3d6 would be more accurate to the way that you want to run one of these kinds of games, especially if you're going to run adventures based on, or adapted versions of old adventures. I think that 46 is going to give your characters overkill stats, or at least has the probability to do so. Referencing back to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, they actually solved this in a very interesting way, where it says that 3d6 is generally the way that people will roll stats. It mentions 46 as well. It shows some probability curves for each of the d6 rolling mechanisms. And then it says that you can roll 12 characters and pick the best one. And there's another one as well, like you can pick the ability scores kind of like you would for Pathfinder, like an array. So it gives you options for everything. The last edition only says 46. Obviously, this is up to Dungeon Master discretion, and they can change whatever they want at any time, as the first page of the book says, but I'm going to try to evaluate what's in the book. Obviously, Dungeon Master Johnny would be able to adapt this sort of thing on the fly if he had old school players, but 46, maybe that's usual for people who started with like Pathfinder or 5th edition, but that kind of scares away old folks like me, or old school players like me. I'm not that old yet. Getting older with every day, though. One thing that I do like is that a magic user and the magic user subclasses are magic users again. They're not like wizards or whatever, and the way that they work is closer to the classic magic user, where they're sort of this like carry type class almost, where they're weak at first level and then they become stronger, or at least that's the intent. So the general magic user kind of idea, very good. I have some issues with it though. HP, rolling HP. You get max. So that's another thing that I don't like. 46, too high stats. Getting max HP, why? The rolls and stuff don't really matter that much. At low levels, you're going to die anyway. So why are you giving everyone really high HP? That just seems like another decision that's made to keep really new school players in, but it's going to push away a lot of old school players. And it also is going to make magic users really strong, because I forget if it's like a D6 or a D4 for magic user HP, but it's going to give them a lot of health at first level. It's going to make them really hard to kill. That's kind of a problem that's going to work into some other problems that I have with the magic user. But in the rest of character creation, I really like it. You roll your background, which is excellent. I'm a big fan of, I believe it's called Central Casting. It might be Task Force Games, but it's called Heroes of Legend. It's a book that I owned at one point. I didn't know how valuable it was. I'm not sure where it's gone. I don't know if it's really expensive now, but I can't find another copy of it. But it allows you to roll all your backgrounds, and DMJ's included something very similar in his own book with like major life events and stuff. I think Pathfinder is something like that as well, but I love to see that in the game. A lot of the OSR games that we have now don't include background rolling systems, and having that is fantastic. If you're going to make a character that has like all rolled stats, you can roll what class you're going to be, what race you're going to be, and you can roll now what your background is going to be as well. So you have like a backstory to come in with, and you don't have to think about anything. Or you can think about how these different events will be stitched together, but you don't have to write out like a million pages of something like cringy DeviantArt fan fiction. So option to roll background, fantastic. The abilities are really good, the ability scores. So in something like Pathfinder, I've actually pulled it up here because I wanted to make sure that I was correct. The stats are more punishing and also more supportive of the player, because the stat line is adjusted one down in Pathfinder. So you get punished for -4 if you have the lowest possible stats, which would be like a 3. And then you get +4 if you have an 18 at first level, which is kind of like, it's fine for Pathfinder. I quite like Pathfinder. I'm sure you can see the books. Actually, they're too short, but I do have a lot of Pathfinder books. I really enjoy the game. I think it's quite good. And of all these new RPGs, it's the best one. But that doesn't really fly for an OSR kind of game, and I think that DMJ has correctly chosen the old stat array. Very good. Which is confusing as to why you would then give people 46, which is kind of the Pathfinder way, because you now have this like big stat line that can go up to like 36 or some shit, because you're rolling an extra dice, but then you're giving people the classic stat array. Kind of weird. If I ever run this game, it's going to be 3d6. Character races, or sorry, not character races, character classes all have separate leveling, which is excellent. That's definitely how it should be. When we were playing, we were doing, because it's like a live stream game and it's kind of a narrative event, and for various reasons, I'm imagining that, like, when I DM, I often do this too. I just give people like the level at set pieces or progression marks in the campaign. What is it called? People call it like waypoint leveling or checkpoint leveling or what have you. Like a certain number of sessions, you give people the level. Or if you want them to have something, you know, there's going to be a boss fight in the next session, you're going to give them the level then. that's fine, and that's to DM discretion. But as it's written in the book, and I think this is really good if you're doing like a Labyrinth Lord or BX kind of module, this is fantastic to have separate classes level differently, because like Thief can be, you know, the kind of specialist kind of thing, because they're going to level up quicker. I love it. Really, really good. Martial Artist has been added as a class. I believe that in the extended versions of Basic, don't quote me on it, and also in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, they made a lot of attempts to include a bunch of martial fighters, like additional martial fighters. I know that Samurai are in AD&D. Samurai actually got added to Pathfinder as well. And every player always wants to make a character that's like a wrestler or some kind of like a barehanded fighter. Having that by default in the game is really good, and I'm glad that they've included it. It's a subclass of fighter, and kind of bouncing off of that subclassing idea, Paladin is a subset of fighter, which is fantastic, because if you become a fallen Paladin, then you know like what hit dice and stuff to take. There's no weird multi-classing. Paladins should always be a subclass of fighter, in my opinion. They're separate in a lot of the newer RPGs, but having them be a fighter subclass is definitely the best way to go, given the way that alignment and paladins and stuff work. There's also subclasses of magic user as well. I remember illusionist being one of them. I think there's one other, and that's fantastic to just give a little bit more variety to being a magic user, because generally speaking, with the expanded versions of Basic and a lot of OSR games, you will have like a ranger, which is a subclass of a fighter, and a paladin, which is a subclass of a fighter, and a cleric is a lot like a fighter too, and you know, like a bunch of different types of thief specialist sort of things. They can kind of go in different directions. And then a magic user is just a magic user. And sure, they have access to all these wonderful spells, but it kind of makes all the wizards artificially feel the same. And I like that you can spice it up a little bit with last edition. Fantastic. Skill checks as well. When you're making your character and you're looking at the skills, it gives you an example of each skill check. Like, for a religion knowledge check, it says, especially useful for a dungeon master, you're trying to remember information about a lost god or something like that. And it does that for every single skill check in the book for the last edition. And this is really good, because I played a couple of games where it's not necessarily obvious what a skill does, and it doesn't say so in the book. Or there's like examples of play in the sidebar or something, but the specific skill that we're looking for never comes up. And it gets left to DM discretion. And like I've said before, and like I said in the Homebrew's Not Official Content video, you DMing is wonderful. Like, you can come up with different things, but, you know, we're trying to evaluate the quality of the game. So being clear in your rules is to the benefit of the game, right? You have a specific example, that's wonderful. So examples of each of the skill checks, fantastic. I love it. There's also kit packs, or standard adventuring gear packs, which is something that I've seen a lot in newer games, and I think that some older games had it as well. And DMJ's okay in diversifying, like, there's like Magic User Pack 1, Magic User Pack 2, or like multiple different packs for like a fighter or a barbarian or something. And that's great. I really like that idea, especially for newer players. But taking the kit pack instead of the money is always kind of weird. People forget what's in the packs and stuff. And I think that shopping is something that a lot of newer RPGs have actually just done so well that I really don't like going back to some of the older stuff. Like, I've been playing Lamentations of the Flame Princess a little bit. I think I've talked about that before. Old School Essentials also very good. Basic Fantasy is another example, but they actually have a whole book of kit and kind of fixes it. And in a lot of these older games, there's only a couple of items. There's like a couple pages of items. In Lamentations, I think all of the items are listed on like the first like 2 pages. Not even pages really, on the inside of the book, and then the back of the first page. And that's fine if you're doing like a very simple adventure. And obviously the DM can come up with stuff, and there can be things in the module. There's shops in the module that have items that aren't included in the standard list. That's always what you have to end up with. But in something like Pathfinder, where you have like ultimate equipment, like I don't want to go back. I want to spend like 80 hours being able to pick each item that my character is going to take, right? So having equipment packs is great. It's good for new players, like I was saying. Having kind of limited equipment, as DMJ has in the game, makes you kind of forced to take one of these equipment packs almost. Like, you're going to have to buy the same items anyway, so why not just take one of the packs? I probably should check the old totals, but giving people the equipment packs at a little bit of a discount could be a good option as well. Don't quote me on it that he didn't or did do that. But that could be tantalizing if you expanded the equipment list. But, you know, after reading Ultimate Equipment for Pathfinder, and some of the other shopping books that they have one for basic fantasy as well. I don't really like just seeing one page of equipment anymore. That could really be fleshed out, and it would make it a lot more fun to choose what items you guys are going to have at first level. You've expanded the classes a little bit in ways that I like. Expand the equipment as well, so that we can be more unique at first level. I'm always big on the whole simple characters thing, but I don't... In this regard, having simple classes is fine, but being able to mix it up and be a little bit different would also be a good option, at least, to have. So kit packs we spoke about. Saves. The way that saving throws work is the classic style, where you're trying to beat a number at a certain time. This is really good because the whole unified D20 system that came out with 3rd edition, and there's other games that did it as well, is very streamlined. It's very user-friendly for newer players especially, and I have a lot of respect for what Wizards of the Coast did with 3rd edition for that reason. People thought it was like the best RPG ever when it came out. People have since kind of bagged on 3rd edition and 3.5, mainly because Pathfinder did what they did better, and then 4th edition kind of came out right after from Wizards, and that was kind of a disaster. So 3rd edition, I think, is a bad rap, but the whole unified D20 system thing was good. The problem with it that I have, and this is something that I don't understand when they remove THAC0 from the game as well, you're rolling dice in the same way all the time, which makes every kind of D20 roll feel the same. So having saves be beating a certain number based on like whatever stat you have or whatever class you have is kind of cool, because now you have like a combat roll, right, where you're trying to beat a certain AC, fine. But when your wizard is rolling versus poison, it's going to be different than your fighter rolling versus poison at different levels and stuff. That makes every roll different. This game doesn't have THAC0 in it. It has ascending AC, which is kind of neither here nor there. It's sort of the same, but trying to have your rolls be different is always good. It keeps players more engaged, I find. And they're not just overloaded with rolling a d20 in the same way over and over again. That I don't think it's a major like deal breaker thing. I don't think it's one of the kind of neither here nor there sort of things as well. But I really do like the way that the older games do that. More of that would be great. If I ever do design an RPG or have input on one, I'd probably try to have like more different types of dice rolled per thing. Because while it increases the complexity very minorly, it makes each class feel more unique, and they have their own role because they're rolling their own dice and stuff like that, or they roll their own dice in their own way, and the first way to do that is with the saves. So great, I like it. There's also a mapper role, which I've spoken about in my first video actually on the channel, where I was talking about old school essentials, how there's a mapper. One of the players is drawing a map of the dungeon, because if you're playing in a dark area, if your characters are walking through a dark area, DM says like you make a left turn. The player has to remember that, because you might not necessarily have like torches or dark vision or whatever, and the DM might not have drawn the entire map, just certain rooms, and that makes it more engaging because now you're both sort of building the space, the player and the dungeon master, and you have a literal map to look at and see if it conflicts with what the DM has, and you can see how lost you actually are. It's very good for a number of reasons. I recommend my first video on this channel about ending sessions early if you want to learn more about the mapper role sort of by secondhand. Eventually, when I talk about all the different versions of Dungeons & Dragons, which will be a future video, I'll talk more about the mapper role. I think it's very important. But that sort of branches into another comment that I have about spell spacing, where each of the spells he's made like diagrams, and or there's a little paragraph underneath the spell saying what kind of spacing it does. And this is actually relevant in a lot of ways when you're playing with a board, which is the way that you should play D&D. This is relevant to when I was playing with DMJ when we were playing live, because he plays using a board, and he doesn't do like Roll20 or some bullshit. He actually has like minis on a board, and you tell him like 3 squares north or whatever. Because when I was playing a caster, which I don't normally do, I was playing a character named Maduro, who's an elf wizard. He, when he was casting spells, I could tell you like where the cone of a spell would be because of the rule book. I could tell you like later in the last 2 sessions, I believe, when I was casting web and like fireball and stuff like that, I was actually able to know like exactly where status effects would be happening in a web that's on fire. Because it's telling me there's like a 20-foot square or what have you. Or like there's a grenade table in the book as well that shows like point of impact and like the explosion around it. It's like a defilade zone if you're familiar with that. Wonderful. I like it. Knowing where spacing and stuff is good. He's imagining that DMJ is quite a proponent of playing with a board as well. He's playing with a fucking physical board when he's playing online, like not some Roll20 bullshit. So having spacing and stuff be relevant, which it isn't so much with a lot of modern RPGs, is fantastic. And if he went further in that direction with like cones and stuff like a Shadowrun 3 does, that would be even better. But including spacing is wonderful, and I want to see more of that in the next version of First Edition. But that's not a negative. That's I want more. Spacing is wonderful. Mounted combat and jousting are in the game. Fuck yes. Fuck yes. Not super relevant, but I'm standing next to them. I recently did a bunch of little miniature horses for some characters that I wanted to run in kind of like an old school sort of game. And this is something that I realized while I was kind of like basing them, is that I don't remember a character that's bought a mount for a long time in a lot of like newer school games. And when you're playing kind of like a low or relatively low magic setting, you are going to want to buy a mount or buy a boat or something like that, some kind of like movement option. And the horse is normally the best thing that you can have. Like a paladin should ride on a steed. A knight should have a fucking gigantic war horse that like charges people, and he's like impact cavalry, and it's fucking awesome, right? That's something that just isn't in the game anymore. People are just wandering around on foot, which I imagine people did plenty of in the Middle Ages or whatever. But characters should have at least the option of riding around on a horse, and it's been so diminished. And this kind of plays into the separate leveling and the other aspects I've talked about as well. This would be a fantastic game to just play like that freeform, old school, like basic kind of sandbox game in. Because he has the rules in place for all of these different like traversal options. The characters all level differently. You could go on a wonderful like just general adventure in a certain world. And obviously because we were playing an online game, that wasn't really what ended up happening. But if you're just playing this game with your friends, it would be great. So there's rules for mounted combat, and there's fucking rules for jousting. It's not like it's never been in a game before, but this is sort of like a post-5e game that includes shit like that. I'm sure someone's going to say that like this expansion for Pathfinder or 5th edition or something. Like I know that you can have like a cavalry lance in 5th edition, and Pathfinder actually has a cavalier, I think, as well. So it's not like these characters don't exist, but they're so downplayed and you never really see them. Whereas this book only has like 98 pages, and it takes space for mounted combat and jousting, which is just awesome. Really, really good. I think that I should kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about the magic user in general. Before I got a couple more points, but another negative point: magic user. So I said magic users were okay, and they are, but some of these changes have gone a long way to making magic users very overpowered. at first level especially. So you're rolling 4d6, which is going to give you ludicrous stats if you're allowed to place them as you want. If you go down the line and you pick a magic user because your stats are good enough, it would kind of give you the same result eventually. But, so you're rolling 4d6. The fortunate thing is that you have the old attribute matrix, so you can't really get too powerful. But you're taking your max HP, and a magic user can cast, like, Arcane Bolt whenever they want as, like, a cantrip, which just wasn't an option in the older games. And then you're taking additional spells based on your intelligence, and your spells per day and stuff are a little bit different. Mages are ridiculous. They're like rangers, basically. They're spamming in arcane bolts from far away constantly, all the time, from first level, with max HP. Why? I understand that you want to make a magic user less sucky, not like 1 HP at first level walking around with like 1 spell. Maybe that's too hardcore or something for a modern audience. I understand that. Maybe you want to make them more powerful in some way, but just making them like much more tanky, able to do more damage, and able to cast spells whenever they want, and able to have better stats at first level just seems like overkill. So scaling them back a little bit, I think, would be really, really good. That's definitely something that I would look into changing up a little bit. Also, with mages, wording of spells is kind of fucked up for some of the spells. Most of them are fine, but playing into the spacing and durations and things, most of the time it's fine. There were a couple of times, I think in the second and third session, where I was playing Majuro and DMJ's online game, where I would try to cast some ability, and the stipulations for casting or something about it would be vague. And the wording isn't too bad. It's not like you can never figure it out, but it slows down the game a little bit. So tightening everything up, giving an example if you have to for every spell, which would be shitty, but if that's what you have to do, it's what you have to do to be more clear, would be really good, and that would resolve that problem. But those are my kind of major issues with the mages. Another issue, death saves. What are death saves doing in this game? So 4d6 and taking HP max are already kind of like weird new school decisions for this supposedly old school game. What are you doing giving me death saves after 0? And if you're going to give me death saves after 0, which I don't, like, I'm not inherently against any sort of design choice. I think it's very close-minded. But you give me death saves in the same way that 5th edition gives you death saves, where they're just made up, pretty much. They're random. Completely random. Like, you can't... So, rolling dice is random, right? It's, or at least somewhat random. But you can influence the dice. It's not just a pure gambling game, D&D. It's more dynamic than that. You can give yourself stat bonuses to try to break a certain AC if you're a fighter. You can give yourself, like, better armor, so when people try to hit you, it doesn't work. You can have really high int, so you can cast spells better. And those modifiers apply to your dice rolls. So in 5th edition, they introduced death saves, where you hit 0, and you don't instantly die like you would in one of the older games, or you aren't, like, paralyzed and fucked up, and you have to be taken to some cleric or whatever, like some kind of Thieves' World shit. You just are rolling d20s to see if you stabilize, and you have to make 3 or fail 3. If you fail 3, you die. If you roll 3 successful death saves, you stabilize, and then people can, like, pull your unconscious body up or something like that. I don't understand why, but Wizards of the Coast decided that it was a good idea to say that when you are dying, you are only in the hands of fate. Your ability to cling to life is entirely random. Which, to a degree, it is, because you are rolling a d20. But you can't fucking tell me, actually you're rolling 4d6, so maybe everyone is super tanky now, you're taking HP max. You cannot fucking tell me that a barbarian, who's extremely physically fit, has, like, really tight core muscles, who's been stabbed through with a sword, and he's bleeding to death on the fucking ground, that he would be worse at clinging to life, or equal to clinging to life, as, like, a gnome who's been stabbed in the same fucking way. Or you know, a wizard who's, like, really frail or something like that. there is a random element, right? As with all things, like if I fall over right now, I could hypothetically break my neck. But because of my relatively young age and the fact that I'm in relatively good shape, I'm less likely to do so than somebody who's like 60 years old. So the fact that your death save is based on if you roll above or below 10, that you pass or fail, respectively, is kind of insulting. And I don't know why, out of all of the aspects that you've taken from 5th edition and other games, you would want to take this element from 5th edition when it's one of the most retarded elements. And I'm sorry if I'm being like very harsh, but this makes no fucking sense. In Pathfinder, there's a very complicated below death system. In old school essentials and BXD and AD&D, there's a very simple one where you hit 0 and then you die, right? I'm going to give you something even better that's in between. Come up with some sort of a physical attribute for each of the classes that helps them to cling to life, or just make it based on some sort of like body attribute thing. Strength, constitution, something like that. When you roll, it's going to be modified by that. If someone has a particularly strong will with a god, they can divinely fucking intervene. They have a certain chance of being able to roll a second d20 or something like that if they're like a paladin and they've taken a certain feat. Or something like that. Or they're a cleric and they've done a certain deed that day. It should be in the rules that they're able to cling to life in some kind of other way. But especially for physically fit athletic characters, for a real life example, during like infantry battles and when you get hit with fucking artillery and shrapnel and stuff like that, your core muscle fitness is what is going to keep you alive if you get shot. It's like your muscle ability to like clench is what will stop you from bleeding to death in a lot of circumstances. And it is random where the bullet hits you. It can hit you in the heart and you can instantly die. But if you get shot, you want to be in good physical health. If you're underweight on your deathbed versus overweight on your deathbed, you're more likely to die more quickly because it's based on your BMI. If, I could give you a million fucking examples, but there's different circumstances all the time for clinging to life. Why is your system for this based on just pure random chance? It shouldn't be. And you can actually one-up Wizards of the Coast by making it based on some kind of a body attribute or some sort of a religious thing. That's just my piece. You really should do something like that. You've included rules for fucking mounted combat and jousting and underwater combat in your game. You should have better rules for dying, I think. And we're going to end on a little bit of a positive note here. So DMJ is a really experienced DM. You can tell by the way that he runs his game. He's got a lot of minis and shit. I can tell he's been doing this for a long time. Probably longer than, or for a longer portion of his life, we'll say, than I have. Because I'm sure he's been playing D&D longer than me. Because he's been playing longer than I've been alive. But there's something that I noticed with the cheat sheet. And I want to reference this with a product that I have. So, most Dungeon Master screens, there's a generic one that I have. It's kind of made out of like binder material. You could replicate something similar using 2 binders, actually. Most DM screens will have panels in them. This one actually has some Pathfinder panels that I've already put in it that came with it. Right? See, there's 4 panels. Most DM screens will have 3 or 4 panels in them because they have to like fold out and they sit on the table and you sit like this kind of behind your screen. I like to stand behind it, but I'm just kind of weird like that. 4 panels that you can slip papers into. DMJ's included some little like cheat sheets at the end of his book. 3 pages. That's very smart. And I think that kind of says all you need to know about his game in general. It's well designed. And it's made by someone who has a lot of experience with dungeon mastering. And you can tell because the equipment that you dungeon master with, at least for a large part, except for the negatives that I said, his game seems to have been like designed around playing with minis, playing with a board, and having your cheat sheet formatted in such a way you can print it out and stick it into a screen that you can just buy. 3 pages, very smart. And I want to end on that note because I think that's really showing of his potential for designing this game, and I am excited to see what he does with the next version, this next rules iteration that he's doing. Very excited to see it.